I ask that the quorum call be lifted.
Without objection.
We are here, Mr. President, in the waning hours of 2020, expectant and hopeful about the coming year. And I want to wish all of my colleagues a very healthy and happy new year in the hope that we will fulfill the promise of our constituents, our country, our Constitution, in moving forward to meet and conquer the pandemic that still ravages our nation and renew our economy that still is failing. We are the greatest nation in the history of the world, and Americans are hurting. This body has taken positive and important steps toward meeting this public health and economic crisis, as well as the hurt and harm that continue to plague Americans. In a number of important relief packages, we have helped to meet those needs and enable the nation to bridge the gap created by this pandemic, an economic gap that has become a chasm, a cliff that seems without end. And for many of our fellow citizens, a time of unparalleled and unanticipated pain. The relief package that we've passed most recently, I think we can be proud to say, is the second largest in our nation's history. And it will provide a second round of paycheck protection loans, forgivable becoming grants, so that small businesses can keep their doors open, more aid for our transportation and education systems, money to distribute the vaccine that will be a lifesaver for so many Americans, and other important aid, including a $600 stimulus payment for every American who is making less than $75,000. That's real assistance for a family of four, $2,400, because every child as well as adult receives that money. But all of that, $906 billion, is only a down payment. It is a life raft. And it has to be followed by an even more robust, bigger, bolder package to provide real relief and sustenance for the survival of our economy and literally the survival of Americans who are struggling to put food on the table and to buy medicine, pay rent and mortgages, clothe their children. We have all told our stories on the floor of the Senate during 2020 about constituents waiting in food lines, hurting for the funds needed to stay in their homes or apartment and to pay for the medicine that is literally a matter of life and death. We've told those stories. We've talked about Americans who are struggling. We have the opportunity now to do something about it. And so I appeal to my Republican colleagues very bluntly and simply, give us a vote on the Cash Act. Let us vote on a standalone $2,000 stimulus payment bill. Allow every one of us to go on record on that $2,000 stimulus payment bill that would add $1,400 to the $600 already provided. not to minimize the importance of the $600, but it is inadequate. It is insufficient. It is unacceptable because it fails to provide the basic need to meet the desperate and dire straits of so many Americans. We're talking about families that need that money to buy bread and milk, paper towels and toilet paper, goods and services that are necessary to the survival of their families. $600 is simply not enough. And that is why I call on my fellow colleagues to persuade their leader that we should be permitted this vote, because I believe that if there's a vote, it will pass. Having spoken to Republican colleagues here, I have no doubt, none, that that standalone $2,000 stimulus payment measure, the Cash Act, would pass overwhelmingly, just as did the $600 payment as part of a larger bill. And the simple fact is that measure is the only viable vehicle. Any other measure loaded with other provisions, whether it's the Section 230 reform or a commission to investigate the last election on fictitious fraud, is doomed. It is doomed logistically. It is doomed legally and physically. There is no way for the House to pass it. Only the House bill, if passed, can provide Americans with the $2,000 stimulus payment that they so desperately need. Only the House bill provides that relief. Any other measure will be doomed because the House cannot come back to pass it in the time that we have left in this session. And so the majority leader is essentially blocking a step that will literally save lives, supported by the vast majority of the American people, a significant part of his own conference, and every Democrat. And have no doubt, every Democrat will vote for it. We've clamored for it, a higher stimulus payment for months when the majority leader refused to come to the table. And then when the President of the United States failed to lift a finger, he was on the golf course, when it might have made a difference in raising that $600 amount higher during the negotiation. But looking forward, there's a way to provide this relief to Americans without leaving here in a contest of blame, but in a new year of mutual congratulation. Pass the $2,000 stimulus payment plan as a standalone, clean bill. Now, I just want to say, I'm probably the only senator who has supported two measures. One of them actually passed by the Congress and signed by the President to reform Section 230, and the other unanimously voted out of the Judiciary Committee. They reform Section 230, and I support reforming Section 230. I have hardly been uncritical of Section 230, and there should be major reform of Section 230, but it has to be done in a careful, deliberate, and considered way as a separate measure, not as a meat axe in a totally unrelated bill. the $2,000 payment bill that provides real relief to Americans. Loading the Cash Act with poison pills is obstruction. It is not constructive legislating, and it fails to meet the test of this moment. It is vital that we move forward to provide struggling Americans with this relief. And scuttling the $2,000 stimulus payment bill with a half-baked Meat Act evisceration of Section 230 is cruel and downright stupid. It betrays the mission and obligation that we have in these waning days of 2020. Americans need more help, and they need hope. Help and hope are embodied in the vaccine. Unfortunately, the rollout of this vaccine, despite the $8 billion contained in the latest pandemic relief bill, has been hopelessly behind schedule. The number of doses distributed is roughly a tenth of what it should be, even under the scaled back schedule that this administration has adopted. 20 million vaccinations were promised by the end of the year. That number was way below the initial promise. And only a tenth of them, probably about 2 million, will be actually provided. Instead of taking responsibility or taking control, President Trump is still tweeting. Instead of action, more talk. Only action will save lives. And either he doesn't care enough, or he doesn't really see what is necessary to do in order to save these lives. Because the distribution of this vaccine is a matter of life and death. And so, using the Defense Production Act, mobilizing America, making sure states have the resources they need, providing money to hospitals, and making sure there are the vials, syringes, training for workers, as well as the facilities to transport, store, and distribute this vaccine are essential now. They are missing at this moment, and the president is where the buck stops. Now, I look forward to a 2021 when a new president will expand the stimulus payments to individuals, and when many of the other gaps left unfinished, action that still is necessary will be fulfilled by another, more robust, bigger, bolder pandemic relief program. I hope we'll have the same bipartisan support that we saw at the end of this year for the latest. I hope we will overcome the divisions that have prevented us from doing what is really necessary and adding $1,400 to the $600 already provided. We need to do more for small businesses. Yes, there will be another round of PPP payments, but this chasm faced by restaurants, retailers, small businesses struggling to keep their doors open, keep their people on payroll during the holiday. We've seen them all and talked to them. Their stories are riveting and heartbreaking. Business people who have poured their souls and hearts and lives into these businesses only to see them threatened with extinction. And this crisis has a racial justice aspect that cannot be ignored, because disproportionately The businesses that have failed are Black and brown owned. Disproportionately, the lives lost have been in Black and brown communities. Disproportionately, the jobs lost have been in those same communities, Black and brown communities that have suffered more than any other as a result of this pandemic. And so we need to make sure that they receive the vaccines as well as therapeutics and testing that is necessary to save lives. We are in the midst of a racial justice movement. It affects policing and criminal justice, but it also affects our schools, where the zip code of a child's residence can mean the difference between quality education or not, where Black and brown communities suffer twice or 3 times the death rate of others as a result of this pandemic, where job discrimination still exists, and in housing, redlining still afflicts these communities, and where environmental quality, rivers, lakes, air, still can be disproportionately contaminated and polluted in communities inhabited by Black and brown people. We are here in the last day of an unprecedented and catastrophic year. More than 342,000 of our fellow Americans are dead as a result of this insidious virus. Over 342,000 gifts unwrapped, places at tables left open, and many of them without final goodbyes. This past year will go down as one of the hardest in our history. I think we all hope for a better year, but it will come only if we take the kind of action that apparently my Republican colleagues are failing to provide today, which is to meet the needs, to match the moment of these desperate and dire straits of so many Americans. The failure to approve an additional $1,400 and pass the Cash Act is a haunting omission. And my hope is that the hopes of a hurting nation will be met in this new year, that the calls for justice and relief will be heard, and that the ailing and sick, not just physically, but emotionally, will be met. This crisis has been one of physical health care, but also mental health care. And the emotional strains can be seen in the rising rates of domestic violence, substance abuse, disorder and addiction, and so many other areas where mental and emotional stress and anxiety have taken a toll. The hopes of a fearful and grieving nation rest on our shoulders, and we cannot let them down. Thank you, Mr. President. I yield the floor.